Jay. We got a monster episode today. We're talking draft board, mock draft, draft pools, college guys, prep guys, all of them.
You get into the real meat and potatoes of the draft and you start talking about specific names and strategies for teams, it gets really exciting. So it's what we talk about all the philosophical stuff for. So now we get to this point where we can start talking about names and whatnot. I think we'll get even more intense as we get closer and closer to the draft and the MLB Combine.
Oh, without a doubt, we're going to peel the curtain back a little bit, look inside of our process at Prep Baseball, see what you've done with the Marlins, Yankees in the past, getting prospects on a board. How do we value them? Because the MLB draft is so much different than anything else out there. I know any scouts who are listening ad nauseum, yes, it's a draft of accounting. How much is this guy willing to take? What is the signability? That comes into factor, not just talent. This guy's here, 1 through 500, which might be my first point that we really want to steer away from. And the industry's been doing it for too long. Ranking guys 1 through 500, college, high school combined. To me, it makes no sense.
Yeah, Shooter, you see this from different media outlets that do these kind of things. And it happens within the team environment as well. There's a lot of proponents in organizations, and there's a lot of pressure on scouting directors these days to line players up 1 to 1,000, 1 to 500, 1 to 300. At what point does it not make any sense? Given what you just said, the draft is very, very complex. At times, yes, it's a draft of accounting. We have people in the draft room specifically paying attention to draft pools and those types of things. But from a very pragmatic standpoint, what's the purpose? I guess I would ask you that. I don't quite understand why. I have an answer for you. From the outside looking in, though, you haven't been in the draft room with a major league team. Why do you think they're doing it? Let me ask you that one first.
My selfish side is I want to have track record in the future. This is where we have guys.
That's it. And it sounds good, right? It sounds good to say we had players lined up 1 to 500 or 1 to 300 or whatever a major league team does. And I am major league teams are doing this. Not every major league team. And I would not advocate for it. But given the emergence of models, I mentioned this earlier in one of our episodes, the scouting director is not always the one pulling the card in the draft room. A lot of people, there's a lot of voices, and that's one of the most difficult things for a scouting director to do is manage that room and manage the process that's sometimes been handed to him. So when you're dealing with 300 players, 400 players in order, it can absolutely jam up a process. And I don't understand skipping over a player just because. So if that's the case, why would we line them up 1 to 300, 1 to 4? We never did that. Let me be very clear with Marlins. We did not do that. We did get fairly deep on our board. We would try to get to about 100 players lined up. Sometimes it would land at 75. Sometimes it would land at 80. But we really worked hard to get to 100 for a very specific reason. But there are teams out there that are doing 300, 400, 500 in a row.
Interesting. And we've talked about in the past how the groupings, the lanes that these guys are in, and that's kind of the process that we utilize for this. I think it's important at the top. Most years, are we going to put them in the order of where they'll be drafted, or are we going to put them, quote unquote, big board? This is where we evaluate their talent level. And for my purposes and the Prep Baseball purpose, this is our big board. This is where their talent's evaluated. And a lot of time that's in groupings. And because of this, it will be more high school laden. And you and I have talked about this. And I was actually talking with some scouts recently about the list. Oh, that guy's not going to sign. Like, I don't care if he's going to sign. This is where we have him evaluated right now, whether or not he signs. There should be more high school guys because each class, I think on average, is about 60 to 70 players from a particular prep class will be drafted in the top 60 picks. So that's not just in that 1 year, but in their 3 or 4 year draft cycle, you're looking at about 30 plus first rounders, right? Whether it's out of high school, the 10 to 12 coming out of high school, or the 18 to 20 who are coming out of college, right? Combine those in their 2 years there. That's a lot of talent. So when you're looking at, okay, this guy's going to be a 4th rounder out of college, well, we might have a ton of high school guys that we have evaluated ahead of them. Doesn't mean they're going to sign. but that means their value's there. If they go to school, they just sift up and be on campus. So that's kind of our process when going through this. Now, there are some intricacies that, yes, this guy is a little more value right now in this moment. Maybe we think this high school kid's better, but that a lot's predicated on him going off to school and performing, which may not happen. And yes, everybody's going to be wrong. What's the success rate of a draft? It's just not all that huge, very difficult. So you have to take that into account. We are going to be wrong. There are going to be big time players that do not make this list. We'll be right on some. We'll be wrong on others. That's the fun in this. That's why everybody likes to get around the water cooler and talk about it.
You just pulled back about 50 layers of the onion right there. So I don't know what you want me to attack first. But you know what, Shooter? Here's what I'm going to start with. When I came on board with Prep Baseball Report, that was something that I had to quickly come to terms with because I was on the outside looking in. I was looking from the team towards media, whoever's putting out draft lists. And sometimes I didn't understand why exactly different media outlets did what they did. Mm-hmm. I always wondered, are they just trying to nail how they're going to go? Are they going to go in this order? Is that the goal there? Or are you trying to put your big board together? What I really appreciate what you just said, and it quickly came, it was easy to digest once you and I had spoken about this. It's a little bit different than the teams, but not too much different. I'll explain that in a second. But looking at historical returns in the draft, when a team looks at historical returns and they say, okay, we're expecting probably on any given draft, specifically with the prep players, we're expecting maybe 8 to 10 players, high school pitchers and hitters, 8 to 10. That's it. That'll be better than a one WAR player. And a 1 to 2 WAR player is a bench player in the big leagues. And we've talked about a 2 or better WAR player is an everyday player in the big leagues. So when we're talking about 8 to 10 players in an entire draft becoming 1+, that's not a lot of players. And you want to give yourself a little room for error. So rhetorically, I'd say if you think that there's 8, how big is a team going to make their prep basket that they're going to choose from? Maybe they'll double it and say, all right, it's going to come out of these 16 or 20 players. So they're going to take those 20 players and they're going to put them up there on the board in the top 50 to 75 picks. And that's going to be it. That's what they're going to choose. For PBR, for prep baseball, I look at this and I say, well, wait a second. There's going to be that group, like you just mentioned, that's going to be a 4th round pick, a 6th round, regardless of whether they're going to sign. That's where teams are just going to declutter the board and they're going to move those players aside once they know the signability is there. And they do that for practical reasons, just so they can, it's just easier on the eyes to look at the board and look at the players that are the most relevant. But yes. I think for the integrity of this thing, I think you're nailing it. When teams look at a prep baseball ranking and they see player, Jimmy Smith or whoever it might be sitting at number 122 on our board, they just need to understand that we're putting them up there because, to your point, that player is going to become Charlie Condon. That player is going to become Travis Bazzana. We think that player has a real chance to become Andrew Vaughn or Spencer Torkelson. These players that went undrafted or drafted extremely low, that's what we're trying to do. And we want to make sure that those players are elevated and visible so that in a couple of years, there's the integrity thing that you discussed.
And we're still listing, we still have those lists. I think the best way to approach it is have that high school list, the college list, but even more so what we switched to last year is the positional breakdown. So you get your prep right-handers, your prep left-handers, prep catchers, prep infielders, prep shortstops, prep outfielders. Mm-hmm. Okay, now this is how this list looks. It's not so much, hey, this guy's ranked at 18, this guy's at 37. Where is he on these positional lists? Because positional needs what an organization values. That's kind of where you should be looking at this list and digesting it. Please head over to prepbaseballreport.com. Check out the Draft HQ. Click on those links to see those guys too.
There is a lot of pressure in major league front offices to not do it that way. Oof. And that is coming from the front office. It's because people want to, there's this idea, there's this concept of, what's the word? Randomness? That's why models are there. Models are there to account for what ownership groups and front offices think is a randomness thing in the draft. I don't think it's random. That would not be my thesis. And therefore, to your point, I like the idea, whether you put them in by position, by prep class versus college class, finding a way to do that makes order and makes sense of something. We talked about in one of our previous episodes, we talked about looking at a board, and that the scouting director, whoever's managing that board in real time in the draft, you're trying to make it as easy on that person as possible to make selections. When the players are up there 1 to 300, it's very, very difficult to make selections. You can't see depth in prep class. You can't see depth in an individual position. And sometimes if you and I were sitting in a draft room and we were coming up on our 3rd round pick or our 4th round pick, and I say, hey, the 3rd best high school 3rd baseman is still on the board, or are we going to take the 25th best college right-handed pitcher? And then you might say to me, let's go with that high school. When you position the board this way, like you're talking about, it makes it a lot easier to look at the board and make strategic decisions in real time. But that's just not what's happening in major league front offices. Now, some teams are, but a lot of teams are not.
I'm sure we need somebody, just be that outlier, go out there, grab it, be aggressive, change the game. But I do want to talk a little bit more from my vantage point about our ranking process, because going through the 1 through 100, like I said, approximately 60 to 70 guys in this class, prep class, will be top 60 picks. Right? We're going to miss on a lot. So that's the top 100, maybe top 120 are being evaluated at that level. Then beyond that, there are going to be guys that absolutely outperform this. They're going to go off to college. Now, who are a lot of those guys? We think they can really hit. They may be a right corner profile, Charlie Condon. They may just not fit the mold of in high school, they're going to push their way forward. It's tougher to mitigate that risk on those guys. They have to go off and perform. There may be guys further down, a JJ Weatherholt, who good athlete, just from a cold weather state, hasn't had the time out on the national circuit, just needs more time to simmer. Those dudes go out and perform. The makeup, they're going to get better. So there are certainly guys in our prep top 500 that are on there, and guys who are going to push their way in the future, because ultimately in college, you need to get on the field. You need game tape.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there with a Charlie Condon. If you could put yourself in a major league draft room, when you're talking about player archetypes up on a draft board, and a scout walks into the room and says, hey, I really think this guy can hit. And the scouting director and the national cross-checker are in there, and they're looking at this player, and they're saying, well, how did he perform at East Coast Pro? How did he perform at area codes? How did he perform at the Futures game and whatnot? All this track record we have on these players. And they say, he was okay. He was average. The problem comes when now you're pushing him over to the corner of the field. He's going to be a first baseman. He's going to be a third baseman, something like that. And you say all the pressure's on the bat. And then the signability comes in. That's where a player like a Condon or an Andrew Vaughn or maybe a Spencer Torkelson, that's where they fall down the board. And sure enough, what do? They go to college, even if it takes them a minute to get their feet under them, and then they mash. And then they become Charlie Condon. And then they become Spencer Torkelson. So that's important to understand, is that teams like these players. We like those players, but there's so much pressure on the bat. And that's why you see very few Tristan Casas's go off the board that hot as a high school corner bat. It's very difficult.
And you're talking about Tristan Casas. The Red Sox have been infatuated for, let's say, the last 5-6 years. Mm-hmm. Because as much value as we've seen the college guys have in the corner profile, middle of the order bats, from what I've seen from a distance and following this closely, they're kind of trying to grab those guys before school. So Nick York in 2020.
Yeah.
Kind of a wild pick. Not too wild, because we thought he could really hit. Probably the spring would have revealed more of that they were right. Roman Anthony, Blaze Jordan, Marcel Mayer, they've just kind of gone after these bats in the high school class, mm-hmm. which for me is being glued to high school and knowing, hey, these guys are dudes. And if you don't take them now, there's a good chance those are top 10 picks. You'll never see them. So I'm sure the Red Sox are thinking that internally. I personally love it. I know there's still risk in that. Roman Anthony, corner guy. Blaze Jordan, corner guy. Nick York, probably second baseman, maybe play some third. in left field, whatever it may be, right-handed hitters. Not many teams were doing that, so I did find it really fascinating that the Red Sox were doing that, and these were also some players that I really liked.
Yeah, teams do it in different ways, and you look at what the Red Sox are doing versus a team that everybody puts on the pedestal, the Los Angeles Dodgers. There's a lot more randomness to what the Dodgers are doing. That's not to say it's right or it's wrong. It's not to say that the Red Sox are right or they're wrong. We've talked a lot about trying to understand team strategies and what they're doing. If nothing else, when you watch the Orioles execute a draft, or you watch the Red Sox execute a draft, or the Yankees for that matter, especially as we move further down the board and to a large degree high on the board, you can see clearly what these teams are trying to do. And that's to be respected. If the Orioles are not going to go plowing into a high school pitching market, they tried it with Carter Baumler in 2020, I believe it was.
Yep.
They're going to go more for the position players. Same thing with the Red Sox. And that's to be appreciated. We talked about the Pirates really being committed to those prep arms in that second tier, in that comp to second round area. So long as teams have a plan and a strategy to execute, they give themselves a fighting chance. So kudos to the Red Sox for doing that. Whether I would have personally selected that player, a Blaze Jordan or Nick York, that's a personal thing. But to watch the Red Sox do that, it says to me that somebody in that front office has built, probably multiple people, have built a model, have developed a strategy that they want to employ. And they do it because they understand that there's very few bats in the draft. They understand they're hard to acquire at the major league level, and arms can be acquired a little bit further down the board, and they're willing to take that shot. So
let me ask you two questions, because you've had the experience in this, so that I'm really curious about. One, the better the big league club does on the field. So for this purpose, the D-backs get to the World Series last year. They've had some great drafts. They've gone after some upside athletes. Does that give them a chance, or does that provide them the clout to take chances in a draft? Can they go after more of a high ceiling guy than a floor guy because of that? That's the first question.
Sure. I think that's absolutely the case. The D-backs for years have done, you look at the 21, 22, 23, they're college heavy. Now, at the very, very top, yes, they're going to take Lawler. At the very, very top, yes, they're going to take their shot on Drew Jones. But they've historically then backed into a lot of college players. You look in 21, it's 4 of 6 college players. 4 of 6 have been college players. In 22, 5 of 6 have been college players. In 23, 6 straight college players. So, yes, it does afford them the opportunity to do it. They have not later down the board. Conversely, the Dodgers have. You look what the Dodgers did. They took Maddox Bruns in, what year was that? 2021. Maddox Bruns might have been 21. Now, there's a left-handed pitcher, clearly had stuff. I don't think anybody would doubt Maddox Bruns' arsenal. Really struggled to throw strikes. Last year, what do? They go plowing right into Kendall George, a smallish outfielder from North Texas. Some people raised an eyebrow. He had a monstrous run tool. The Dodgers thought he can hit, and what's he doing? He's out hitting. They probably looked at him and said, this is the high school version of Enrique Bradfield, maybe better. We're taking that guy. When teams, to your point, do have an opportunity, when they are good at the major league level, they do have a chance to reach into a bucket that other teams might not be willing to reach into.
That's so fun to me. And then the next question, and full disclosure, my 5-year-old twin boys are now huge Orioles fans, probably mainly because Adley Rutschman's from Oregon and they root for him. But with their drafts, I do think saying no to some guys and making that right pick early is ultra important, right? Jackson Holliday looks like an amazing pick right now. And a lot of college coaches have to go through this. And you've been in the SEC, Vanderbilt. Your no's are more important at that level than your yeses, right? These guys are coming on campus. This kid wants to come to school. Everybody wants to go to Vanderbilt. Everybody wants to go to LSU. Everybody wants to go to Arkansas. You got to make the right choices. We got to be selective with who we get. You take Adley Rutschman, which slam dunk in 2019, right? It just
easy. It was him and Bobby Witt.
Yeah, Bobby Witt could have been there, but Jackson Holliday is a huge pick. What I want to ask you is, in the first round, those guys are going to be good. How important are those next picks? Because the Gunnar Henderson selection right now, like, that is the best pick that the Orioles made, right? Adley was easy. Just slam dunk, take him. Jackson, maybe there's some other guys in the mix, but he's become what he is. Gunnar Henderson and really Jordan Westberg at this point. He's off to a great start here. Those were two sensational picks, and it's in that comp round. So how much emphasis is on that comp round, round 2, round 3?
It's critical. It's absolutely critical. You think about what that player is. Who is the player that goes in the second round, and how do they make it to that? They don't look on any given day, the player in the second round. And when I say second round, it's the comp pick area, comp second round, when a team's making a second selection, that player looks eerily similar to the player that went 15 picks ahead of them at 10 or 20 or however the math works out. Was there any real difference between James Wood's tools, who the Padres took in the second round, than the guys that went in the top half of the first round? No, there wasn't any difference. He can throw, he can run, and he can hit it really far. So the ability of a team, Gunnar Henderson, I'll get to him in a second. That's a really good example. When you get into these kind of players, you have to be willing to swallow some of the risk that comes with those players. Gunnar Henderson swung and missed at an alarming rate in the summer. He was also 17 years old. He was from a small town in Alabama. When you went in and saw him in the spring, the tools were loud. But he had the weight of an underperforming summer hanging over his head. So where does he go in the comp round? James Wood, same thing. We talked about him in a previous episode. These kinds of players have massive tools, and you have to be willing to swallow the risk on some of those players, specifically in that comp to second round area. Jordan Westberg, good. He's a college player. But he had some holes in his game. Mm-hmm. Had serious tools. You would go into Mississippi State, which is a pretty big field, and you'd see this is the 20 draft. He's smashing balls into their scoreboard. Massive raw power and whatnot. So I think specifically from a position player standpoint, teams like the Orioles have done a really good job addressing that, being willing to swallow the risk, and properly identifying the tools that you need to have to take that risk. Aaron Judge, when the Yankees took him. Giancarlo Stanton, when the Marlins took him. Here's another example here recently. How about when the Yankees took Spencer Jones? Now, that was the first round, I understand, but that was a second round kind of pick. They step up and took him. These players typically come with massive power and elements of performance with some holes. And teams do a good job, like the Orioles, in identifying that.
I'm always fascinated, and I love when teams are at the forefront of changing the game. So getting those bigger guys, Aaron Judge, Spencer Jones, I think what the Yankees have done, especially most recently, it tells you they have a plan. This is what we're going after. This is what we developed. I've been really intrigued by them.
Let me jump in here because I forgot to mention this. When you think about those players, think about a Spencer Jones, think about an Aaron Judge, think about Giancarlo Stanton, think about who did we just bring up? Gunnar Henderson. Oftentimes in a draft room, that player's competing on the board against a very, very polished player. So if you're in the second round, you've got two players. You've got the really polished college guy who's clearly good, Trevor Williams. He's a two-war player, right-handed pitcher, Arizona State. You've got that player exists, okay? And then you've got these Judge, Gunnar Henderson type players that they're going to raise the hair on the back of your neck a little bit more because they got some holes in their game, but they have massive tools, okay? One of the things a scouting director, if he's not asking this question, he should be asking this question. If I pass on Spencer Jones, if I pass on Aaron Judge, if I pass on Giancarlo Stanton, does that player exist further down the board anywhere? And if you can say yes, well, maybe you pass on the player. But oftentimes what you'll find is those types of players, by the time you get to the second round, they don't exist in the third or fourth or fifth round. So what you might say is, as much as I like a Trevor Williams, who became a nice big leaguer, or as much as I like this college pitcher or that high school pitcher, you're taking your last shot. And I'm going to be very clear on this. Your last shot on one of those few players that are uber talented, but have some holes. When you say Spencer Jones and Judge, and you say Gunnar Henderson, we're spanning 3 or 4 different drafts. It's not like you got chance at 4 Gunnar Hendersons in one draft.
Yeah.
So when you've identified that player, you probably need to think about taking him before you just pass and take the safer pick, because that safer pick could exist in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round.
Well, you talked about some front offices having some say in that too, and those are big market teams, right? The Dodgers take Maddox Bruns and hope that this is a number 2. Do the Dodgers and Yankees, do they need to buy a number 4 starter, or do they need to draft a number 5 starter, middle reliever? No, I would think you're trying to get Aaron Judge. We have enough money to go off and get that guy. We're not handcuffed by anything. That's what I value. Even the Rangers, to an extent, they've gone out and shown that they want to win. They're going after guys like that. Is that something in a war room that you're being hit by?
Yeah, that's absolutely you are. When the Yankees front office, and I can't speak for Cash and the other guys that are around him. I've been there before, and it's obvious that they want players like Judge. Well, we all do. That player exists once or twice every few years, but the organization is working hard to identify, and they're willing to swallow more risk because, to your point, they can go out and sign a 4th or 5th starter. It's what makes that player really appealing in the draft. Spencer Jones. We don't know what Spencer Jones is going to become at this point. We know that he can really, really run, and we knew that he had massive power at Vanderbilt. That's what we knew. At that point, they're going to try to nail another Judge. That's just what they're going to do, and that's what they probably should be doing, I guess, given that they're the Yankees or the Dodgers. Conversely, to your point, there are some teams that need to acquire volume of players. Maybe that's the other side of the spectrum. We, with the Marlins, really tried hard to acquire volume, and we did. We acquired a lot of volume, missed on some high picks, missed on some ceiling, I think. You look back at the Blade selection at the time, looked like it was going to be a really, really good pick, missed on some ceiling. He's still a good player. He's still playing in the big leagues, but we emphasized a lot of volume with our drafts, and we got that up and down the board. Team like the Yankees, team like the Dodgers, they're going for the massive home run.
I love home runs. Anyway, we've done a great job introducing the draft board here, talking some high school stuff, but I really want to bring on Dr. David Seifert, our college expert, works with D1 baseball, with prep baseball. I do think that it's going to be college heavy early on in this draft, just with the evaluation process. And even if you equate it to the NFL draft, how many first round grades do we have? And I think the high school class is less than last year, certainly. I think considerably less than next year. So I think there will be more college guys early. And we've talked ad nauseum about, hey, get those college bats, go out and get them. But I want to bring on the great David Seifert. Seif, welcome onto the show, The War Room.
You guys are getting me fired up there in the backstage listening to some of that conversation. Good to be here.
Seif, I want to play the classics from the top. I think anybody who's just a huge draft fan knows who the big college names are, but lay them out for us. Who are the top college prospects coming out this year?
I think the big 3, there's actually like the big 8, but the big 3 for me are Jack Caglione from Florida, 2A guy, first base, left-handed pitcher, Travis Bazzana from Oregon State, second baseman with power who can run, and then Charlie Condon, 2-year start at Georgia, outfielder, first baseman. Some think he can play third. I'm not one of them, but hey, I've been wrong before. Alec Boehm is still playing third base at an average level or maybe slightly below, but just a 6'5" third baseman. Those are too. They don't come by too often. But those are the big 3, and then we just kind of keep talking from there if you want me to.
No, even beyond those guys. So, like, how far apart them? Like, Braden Montgomery's had a huge year to start off. He's a switch hitter. We saw him the Super 60 out of high school. Was at Stanford. Now at A&M. How much has it helped him actually moving from the Pac-12 to the SEC and performing?
Yeah, Montgomery's a great example. He's really closed the gap. If it wasn't a year with Condon doing what he's doing and Bazzana continuing to do what he does, like Braden Montgomery, he could be in talks for 1-1, and maybe some clubs he is. He's had that type of year. He's really just polished and tightened up his right-handed swing has been his big key. It went from having numerous holes, basically just a book swing where you could get it in with the heat and you could throw the off speed away, you could spin it away from him, and not really being an out, but just you kind of like, well, he's gonna be a left-handed hitter only, to what he is now. He's legit power, 70 juice from both sides, 6 arm in the outfield, profiles perfectly to right field. And then the 2 guys we had, well, I don't think we really had him really hiked up there. But two other guys that got hurt early and now they're back are J.J. Weatherholt, shortstop, second baseman from West Virginia, and Nick Kurtz, first base from Wake Forest, who is just unbelievable, easy power. And then, we haven't even talked about the two best pitchers, Hagen Smith from Arkansas and Chase Burns from Wake Forest. So in total, there are 8 premium college guys in my mind, and then a little fall off before you kind of get to the next tier.
Saif, can I jump in and ask you a question about that? Is there a divide? Because I haven't been out and seen all these players, and I think of it in terms of like clusters. Those are the 8 premium college guys you're talking about. Is there a top cluster, or could these players be ordered in any? This is for you, I guess. Do they go in any order, or is there a clear top 2, or is there a clear top 3, or is it just no? These 8 players, I could see any one of them going 2, going 7, going 4.
Last year, I'll just compare to last year. Last year, we had Cruz 1, Skeens 2, Langford 3, and then the last 2 weeks before the draft, our final list, we had Skeens 1, I think Langford 2, Cruz 3, or maybe it was Cruz 2 and Langford 3. But anyway, those were always the 3. Those were like the 3 guys. You pick one of those 3, you couldn't go wrong. Mm-hmm. This year, I actually think there's probably, Caglione, Vazana, Condon, Montgomery. There's really 4 position players, and even Kurtz wouldn't be a bad pick because, he's just unreal, but he's a first baseman. I would personally never pick a first baseman 1-1. That's just me. A college first baseman 1-1, or really any first baseman. In Weatherholt, he was a guy for 1-1 before he, was injured earlier in the year and was out for, I think, 4, 5, 6 weeks. So I'm really not answering a question, but I think it's similar to last year where, there's 4 guys there that would be great 1-1 picks. And then, with that said, those 2 pitchers, you can take those 2 guys in any order as well. But I do have my own order. My own order is Caglione, Bazzana, Condon, Burns, Smith, Montgomery, Weatherholt, Kurtz. Those would be my 8, how I'd line up my board to pick the college guys.
Can I ask you one more question? Sorry, I jump in here, Shooter. I'm curious on Weatherholt because I've never seen him. I briefly at the Big 12 tournament, I saw him last year. How much is his injury going to hold him back, and should teams be thinking about that? He's a really good player from what I remember and what I saw. I don't know if he's really tooled up like a couple of these other guys. It's not like there's 65s and 70s all over the card, but he's one heck of a player. How much does the injury hold him back this year, and how are teams going to handicap that, you think?
Well, he's different to start with because he's twitchy and strong. Some guys are just strong and some guys are just twitchy. Weatherholt's just like twitchy strong, and he can hit for power. He can run. Again, not a shortstop. He doesn't really have a super great arm or super great hands, but he's going to be able to stay in the dirt. If not, he's a top of the order center fielder. Worst case. His hamstring injury this year by itself is not really a concern. He's come back from it, but he had another nagging injury with the CNT this summer. He could only hit. He didn't play the field, so he ran kind of 50% down to first base, and then they pinch ran for him at the CNT trials. Okay. And I think that's how he finished his sophomore season too. But he's had a couple, 3 nagging chronic type injuries. Those are seen, obviously, as you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but differently than a guy goes out and gets hit by a pitch and he breaks his finger. That's I hate to say unavoidable, but that is. Yeah. So as these chronic type things pile up, I think the concern raises. So for me, it would be an orange flag. Not necessarily no flag, but not necessarily like, hey, we're not taking this guy. We're not going to even consider him.
So if you were a team, you can understand him becoming number 8 here, just hedging that. But at a certain point, that injury thing just goes away and someone just pulls him off the board hot.
Yeah, just like you were talking, like, okay, when you get to pick like 35 in the draft, do you want to take this really good college player because you know what you're getting? Or do you want to go for some upside and assume the risk? And I think Weatherholt is that college guy because there's significant upside there. But, yeah, he does have that nagging injury. It'd be no different than – and Weatherholt's not a 4th rounder, but I heard you talk about Spencer Strider earlier, 4th rounder. Well, yeah, he was coming off Tommy John. He had pitched, I don't think it was a full season after Tommy John. So there's still kind of that concern of, him breaking back down or just having that initial Tommy John. So it's no different in that regard.
I'm going to pull up here the mock draft because we got 10 guys here. They're kind of in our order of this is where they are. What I want to ask both of you about is guys who define value. So from our standpoint, I think there's probably 2 high school guys who define value, maybe Cam Caminetti to a lesser extent because he reclassed as a left-handed arm. But Bryce Rayner, Connor Griffin, kind of big time athletes, the huge ceilings, they have a chance to reach that. Those guys probably define their signing bonuses. They're going to command that. Not quite to the extent that Walker Jenkins did last year and Max Clark, but they're kind of up there. From the college standpoint, Seif, going into the year, I felt like Weatherholt and Kurtz would define it, right? Hey, we command this full slot bonus here. Because of those injuries to those guys, that whether you want to say injury prone or not, is it less commanding for them than you would say for Bazana, Cags, those guys? Are they slightly on a less tier?
Well, in Kurtz's case, and again, I hate to speak where I'm not 100% accurate, but I believe I know he's had one shoulder injury. That was what set him back this year. But I think the previous shoulder injury he had was to the other shoulder. So that creeps into your equation for Nick Kurtz. Like, okay, is he going to re-injure either shoulder? Because the first time he injured, okay, whatever. But then it becomes more and more susceptible, after that. So I'm not sure if I'm totally answering your question as you envisioned it. But yeah, with anybody who has any injury, there's always not really a discount, but when the doctors become involved looking at notes and the questions start being asked, that guy does lose a little bit of value compared to a guy like Bazana who is clean, right? Or Condon who is clean, or Braden Montgomery who is clean.
So from there, DJ, I want to ask you this question. You're in the war room, and we have Kurtz going to the Angels, which, hey, why would the Angels take him after last year? Well, that's an immense talent that just dropped to 8. This guy was a chance to be 1-1, a strong chance to be 1-1 for a lot of people in the fall, right? When you're going in, these teams are going to talk to their ownership, president, whoever's running the show, and really bearing down on you as a scouting director. How do you sell? Yes, I know he's got injuries, but this is an unreal talent that shouldn't have got to us. How does that conversation go?
The medical conversation should be fairly simple because you have already crossed that bridge days ahead of the draft. Maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks ahead of the draft, because there is some transparency on the medical stuff now with the combine and whatnot. You have an opportunity to put your hands on some of these players. So I think that bridge would have been crossed. As soon as the bridge is crossed and you say, we're good with the medical, then it shouldn't be a conversation anymore. The only thing that should be the conversation is, can a team leverage that a little bit to shave a little bit more than they already want to? Make no mistake, whether you're Chase Burns or you're Bryce Rayner, these players are going to command so much money at the top of the board that teams are going to, whether they're injured or not, they're going to try to shave some money. So as soon as you introduce this injury that we're talking about, it's just giving a team a little bit more opportunity to shave just a little bit more, and they can pass those savings on down the board. But the injury itself, once you've crossed the threshold of, yep, we're good with it, then you just go with it. Then there isn't any more conversation. Because if you say I'm not good with it, you're probably just going to take another player. Mm. So
it's interesting. And anyway, look at our mock draft here, which full disclosure, mock drafts can be very silly, especially in baseball, where it's not just talent, it's accounting. You're moving guys around. How much will this guy take? We're going to shift over now to talking about these mock drafts, bonus pools, where teams are picking, because there's so much to talk about. I'm going to shift over here just to take a peek at the draft pools for this year. And if you can see the screen here, Seif, DJ, I had no idea that it was this massive. The difference between the Guardians at 18 million plus and the Astros at nearly just a hair under 6 million. That's more than 3x the amount. How do you go in that from each side? So DJ, I'll start with you. You're the Guardians going in. What are you thinking? Then you're the Astros going in. What are you thinking?
Well, if I'm the Guardians, I'm just taking you have so much flexibility here. Just make sure you get the player you really want, because the money is inconsequential for them because they have so much of it. Conversely, if you're the Astros, we had a really good conversation off air earlier today, I thought. And when I'm looking at this graphic, I'm thinking about the decision that they had to make a few years ago. And hopefully they learn from that. And hopefully they understand that even if you have a small pool, like this 5.9 pool compared to everybody else, there's still going to be a very, very good player available. And even at that price point, the player is going to sign. So it always comes down to making sure that group of players that you have, whether you're picking very high like Cleveland or you're picking really low like the Dodgers and the Astros, You really need to be hyper-focused on that cluster of players. You made a comment earlier about the importance of the first-round pick. I can assure you from personal experience that's very important. So for the Astros, making sure that whoever those players are, just pick the player that you really believe is going to be the best player. Because you look back a few years ago, you and I were talking off here, they could have made a better pick than the pick that they made.
Yeah.
And he was available. They could have spent the money on it. They just didn't.
So how much are these guys, like, you're going in, especially the Astros, you don't have much of your first 2 picks, first 3 picks, they have an absolute plan they want to attack, whether it's, hey, we want to get this college bat early, we're going to get that because we're going to hammer one of these high school arms, which there's tons of second and third round depth in the high school arms. We know we anticipate one of these guys will be here, we'll be able to get him. Is that something that they're planning in the pre-draft cycle?
I would think so. I was thinking about something when we were talking about some of those top players, and it kind of comes into play here. When you're in the first round, a strategy that I don't necessarily subscribe to is drafting for need. In the big scheme of things, rounds 1 through rounds 20, I'm not going to be sitting here drafting for need necessarily. I'm probably not going to do what the Dodgers did a few years ago and just draft pitching straight down the board. I think they did that. I don't know if it was
the
21
Angels
or,
did it.
Angels did it. The Dodgers did. I'm probably not going to do something like that. But when you're here in the first round, these players are so talented that you do have an opportunity to draft for need. So if you're the Miami Marlins in 2019 and you want a player that can get to the big leagues really, really fast, you might take Bleday, or you might take Josh Jung, or you may take one of those players, Andrew Vaughn, over a CJ Abrams. As it turns out, Abrams gets there pretty quick and Riley Green gets there pretty quick. In this year's draft, if you're Colorado or you're Cleveland or you're Cincinnati picking really, really high or whatnot, you might really love Connor Griffin, but you lean into a need to get to a player to the big leagues fast, or a positional need. So I think that's important to point out, that you can do that in the first round and you can do it confidently. If you're the Yankees, your need might be ceiling. If you're the Dodgers, your need might just be generally ceiling. Take the highest, biggest tool that you can find.
I usually fall, especially the Guardians have done a great job of chopping up their finances, building up the system, moving things around. And I think, like you talked about, they've got so much money at the first pick, just get them. And Seif, looking back to last year, like Skeens is sitting there, the Pirates, they may move some money. No, just get the best guy, get who you like, because you can move around other money. You'll have so much to get 3 high school prep arms. You'll be able to do a lot with these guys, but at the top, you need to get that dude.
Yeah, I don't know if you're leading me into the question, but I 100% agree with the theory of just get the guy you want, get the top talent. Whatever the bonus is the bonus. I mean, unless Boris is holding you hostage for $2 million above slot or something crazy like that. But I mean, he's a smart man. He's not going to do that. But no, get the player you want the most. Get the player you think is going to be the best big leaguer, and go sign him. With the depth, DJ's got me here. I've never been in I've never been in the war room of a 20-round draft. I've only been in the 40-round draft with an extra affiliate or 2. And at some point you do draft for need because you had another club and a half or whatever, and you had to fill some position. You had to have 3 catchers. You had to have enough middle infielders, enough pitching to fill all these clubs. So now it is different with 20 rounds. So I would like to, sit in the corner or whatever and listen in for a 20-round draft. I'm sure it's a little bit different now, where you're not drafting as much for need, and you just go get that talent each round, each and every 20 rounds.
Can you play? So TJ, let me ask you this. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but can you start playing players against each other? So the Pirates are picking, right? Let's say Kurtz and Weatherholt are both on the board, both Pittsburgh kids. Now you're talking to each agent. Will he sign for 4? Will he sign for 3.9? Is there a potential bidding war that you can get into with these guys? I don't know if we can talk about that.
No, that's fine. I think that, yeah, absolutely. And the agents understand that. These are smart guys. A lot of these guys do a really good job. I mentioned earlier on one of our previous episodes about relationships. When you have good relationships with the advisors and the agents, they understand that stuff happens. So if I were to call you, Shooter, and I said, hey, Shooter, here's the deal. And I'm going to be very transparent. I'm looking at your list up here. Here's the deal. I'm taking Condon or I'm taking Kurtz. What's it going to be? Can we do this price? Those conversations absolutely exist, and you're just transparent with the agent. I did that last year with a combination of picks that we made in the 23 draft. I had that same conversation with agents, and I was extremely transparent. I'm doing A or I'm doing B. What's it going to be? You make the choice. And it was strictly a money decision because the players were the same. It was too hard to distinguish between player A and player B. They were already in the same lane. We liked both of the players. I was trying to make the decision on what's the best order so maybe we can get both of them. So that's what we did. And the agents were very accommodating.
So last year, we talked about it was probably 5 guys that were in that bucket. 3 from the college side that were really getting pushed. So Wyatt Langford, Skeens, Cruz. This year, it seems like, okay, we got those 3 at the top, the 2 arms, 2 high school kids, probably a hair behind those guys with the immediate value with what it has. Weatherholt and Kurtz probably step behind because of the injury. So after that, what does the college class look like? Where is it strong? Where is it weak? I think what the weakness we talked about, kind of the college pitching. We were hoping that it would have a bit more there. What is the strengths positionally from the college side moving past this top 10?
For me, it's definitely in catching. I know if you look historically, there have been oftentimes, not a lot. Let me look at my notes, but in the last 10 years, I think there's been 3 catchers selected. There's never been 3 college catchers selected in the first round in the last 10 years, but there are several times where there have been 2, but more than, I guess the mean is about 1.7. So this year where I'm going is I think there are 2 slam dunk first round catchers with Loma Vida from Cal and then Malcolm Moore from Stanford. But I do think Walter Yannick from Sam Houston State could sneak in there. I know we have him mocked, I think 28th overall. Going in the first round. So that would put 3 catchers in the first round. That'd be a first in over 10 years. With that said, there were also 2 years in the last 10 where that 3rd catcher snuck in at pick 32 twice. So, I was only going out to 30 picks in the first round. So I guess long answer again for me, you always get, but I think college catching is definitely a strength of this year's class because right behind those 3, you have guys like Jacob Cozart, you have Kevin Cozart from NC State. I had him in the first round until I saw him a few weeks back, and I think he fits more in the second round. Kevin Bazell is having a strong year at Texas Tech. Ethan Anderson is putting the gear on 2 out of every 4 times he's splitting duties there in Virginia, but he was solid when I saw him. I think he can not be a frontline defender back there, but between the bat and what he does bring defensively, I think he's a stick, chance to be an everyday guy back there. So it is deep, not only in the first round, but the top 3 rounds. It's pretty thick class from history. And after that, the college pitching has maybe taken a small step back. Especially, I'm not going to pin it all on Brody Breck, but with him kind of up and down and now kind of back up again, starter reliever. It'd been really nice if he would have been on the Chase Burns bus and just performed all year, because then you have Burns, Smith, and Breck, kind of a 3-headed monster of just high upside starting pitchers. But right behind them, you got Trey Yasavage, a right-hand pitcher from East Carolina. This guy's lights out. He's he's low mid-90s. DJ saw him. He can probably better speak to him. DJ just saw him 2 weeks ago, but he's got a swing and miss slider. His stats are unbelievable. He's been healthy his entire life. Kind of got a different look to him, so there's deception. But he profiles more as a mid-4-ish type starter. You got Jonathan Santucci from Duke, who's a potential first-rounder, lefty starter. And then from there, I mentioned Breck before. But Luke Holman, the guy I kind of want to get down to, people forget. People see him this spring, and he's been 90-94, pitching at 1 and 2 with sink and a nice slider. It's not a high analytic slider, but it gets outs. But the thing about his fastball is I think people forget he was 94-97. Now, it was only in 2 or 3 inning stints for the Team USA last summer, but he was 94-97. So I think if that is brought up in the draft room at the right time to the right people, he may jump into the first round. So now we're talking there's 5 first-round college pitchers. So I do think starting pitching at the end of the draft, we're going to look back and say, gosh, that was a strength too.
It's funny. Malcolm Moore and Holman, you're talking about guys going back to our draft board from the prep side. Malcolm Moore, super high in that class. He's a draft eligible sop. The Stanford commitment was carrying him, but he was still featured high. Like, this guy's gonna be a first rounder with the talent evaluation there. DJ, go ahead.
Oh, I was just listening on I like the catching stuff that Seif was talking about. That would get me pretty excited if I was a director sitting in a room hearing my scouts talk about that. That you talk about a positional scarcity. College catching is really, really hard to come by. A couple of years ago, it was the Drake Baldwin group. We really liked Drake Baldwin. The Braves took him, I think, in the 3rd round. He was from Missouri State, Wisconsin kid. We were talking about northern, hockey player. We're talking about northern players yesterday on our call when we were having that offensive conversation with S2 Cognition. And there's a prime example, a northern kid that came down to Missouri State, was a catcher, but it was that group. They had Silas Ardoin, I believe, was in that group. There was a kid from Oklahoma, and then Drake Baldwin. So to hear about all these catchers gets me pretty excited. And specifically when you call out Ethan Anderson, I immediately thought of the guy the Diamondbacks took a few years ago. Was he a catcher? Is he not a catcher? We're not sure. Caleb Roberts, great pick out of North Carolina for the D-backs just a few years ago. So.
He was a really good athlete. I remember watching him. I think he was a junior. Was he a 4th-year college guy that was taken, or maybe 3rd year? But he was like an outfielder too. He was a really good athlete, kind of like Kyle Teal. I'm not saying Kyle Reipert's is Kyle Teal, but similar type of talented guy.
Same concept. And that's why teams don't these catchers that you're talking about, whether you have them at the back of the 1st round or you have them in the 2nd round. That's why it's really hard for teams to go plowing into high school catching or even to take like a Kevin Parada high in the draft. It's really, really difficult to do that because a lot of times these players that you're talking about now, whether it's a bona fide 1st rounder like a Loma Vida or a Moore or Bailey from or it's that 2nd tier, there's opportunities to get that stuff later. We talked about taking Spencer Jones because he doesn't exist later, or taking James Wood because he doesn't exist later. Well, when you're about to take catcher, they do exist later traditionally. And in a market that's deep like this, I'd be thinking a lot about that if I was a team. Locking in on one of these catchers.
I'm thinking the same thing. If the depth's there, pushing back, knowing where you're picking again, and I'm shifting over here to checking out the draft board. So the rounds. So you have rounds 1 and 2 here. When are teams picking? What does our pool look like? Who will be around? Right? If we don't get Loma Vida here, can we get the Kozar? It's something that I'm fascinated in that. But here are a few teams that I pulled that are what are these guys going to do? Obviously, the Guardians at the top and Colorado. They have massive pools. They can get a lot of guys. Look at Colorado. They need an influx of pitching. There's tons of depth in the prep class. Not so much in the 1st round, but you start getting the supplemental through 3rd. There are a huge grouping. So if you check out the prep right-handers, prep left-handers, there are a lot of guys that are really good. They're jumbled together for a reason. They are excellent. I think there's a ton of value based on what they're commanding. So those are the 2 teams, obviously, at the top. They can do a lot. The D-backs, they have a lot of picks on day 1. 29, 31, 35, 64. So let's start with them, DJ. You got 29, 31, 35. What are you thinking at 29? Like, you're going to pick again really soon. Now, right after the Rangers. Are you anticipating what are the Rangers going to do while picking at 29? Or have you this is our plan?
I think I would just come up with my plan and what we need in our organization. We talk about and what the depth of the draft is providing. Historically, the Diamondbacks have not been a team that's plowed into a bunch of pitching. I mentioned earlier, you look at 21, 22, and 23, 4 of 6 college players, 5 of 6 college players, 6 college players in 2023. They're performing fairly well at the major league level right now, right? Certainly last year they were performing well, but you look at where they are as an organization, they're picking at the very back of the 1st round. So, Seif would know some of the college players that might be available back there. I wouldn't be worried too much about what the Rangers are going to do. I would just lock in on the players that I really, really like and I'll try to best understand what the depth of the draft is and just attack as I see fit.
If you're going to take the highest upside, so those 4 picks, right? It's 4 and 6 or whatever. Are you going 29? That's the guy we want to get who might be the reach. If we can get Corbin Carroll at 29, we want to take him there, and then we'll go at 31 and 35 with our safer guys.
Well, I think that we talked about just making sure you take the best player at that point in the draft. You want to get the best collection you can, and if you can take the player for whatever reason, you talk to the agent, you talk to the advisor, and you figure out that he's not going to be selected. The order in which you take the players, this is where the public doesn't always understand, that you might not be taking your favorite player first. You take them in the order that you have to take them. So to your point on the Rangers, if you absolutely knew the Rangers were going to take the player that you wanted, you might take that player first and then just wait a couple picks to get your next guy. So there is some of that strategy, I think, involved, but that's not going to happen until the very, very end as information starts to become a little bit more readily available.
Yeah, I love what the Mariners did last year with their 3 picks. Obviously, I'm biased, watch a lot of the high school guys, but they did a great job with Colt Emerson, Ty Pete, Johnny Farmello, 3 guys that I really, really liked. Getting Emerson there was probably the steal of the draft, honestly, in the long run. And then looking at guys like Ty Pete, upside that they got in those second picks, Johnny Farmello, upside, but huge value as well. Seif, going on, I really like what the Brewers can do. Also, here's one that I want to send out to you guys because we talked about them a little while ago. The Dodgers, they've done a great job, player development, everything up and down the organization. They've been, a model of success. They have 2 picks early on. So they pick at 23 and then not again until 98. What, on your level, when you're with the Marlins, whoever you're with, DJ, Seif, what can the other Dodgers going to do? What are you thinking they're going to do at 23? And what will they do at 98? Because from my standpoint, I think that 98 is going to be a banger. Sorry, college coaches. They may have the chance to steal somebody from your recruiting class.
Yeah, for me, I think you nailed it on your mock. I think Brody Breck is a perfect fit there. I mean, he's what they're all about. I mean, Bobby Miller, Brody Breck, high upside right-handers. They develop those guys. I think he fits them to a T. If Brody continues to pitch like he's pitched the last couple of weeks, Brody will not be there at 23. But if Brody goes back to the early season, then I think you nailed that pick as far as the mock draft. Whether it actually happens or not, we won't know for a little while. But I think you did well there. And then their next pick at 83, I'm hoping they just take the best guy available, right? Like not the best guy that's on the top of their board because it might be a high school guy that wants $2.5 million. But the best guy available that is signable, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. I like what Seif just said there. When you're the Dodgers, the one thing that's unique about the Dodgers is that they really believe, you talk about the synergies of scouting and player development. They really believe in their development. So they're willing to take a guy like a Bobby Miller who had some holes. It looks great now when Bobby Miller but that wasn't super easy to select in 2020. There were plenty of holes to poke in Bobby Miller, or, I haven't seen Brody. Maybe there's some holes to poke in Brody, but that's right up there. That's right in their wheelhouse where they can deliver to their player development. And make no mistake, organizations will not select players if they're not comfortable that their player development departments can develop them. That is a fact. If those synergies don't exist, some of the organizations feel hamstrung or handcuffed not to take certain types of players because they don't have confidence. That's not the case. To Seif's point, which is a good one, the Dodgers do not have that problem. They have some really good things going on between the two departments, so they will jump into the deep end of the pool and take a player, a Maddox Bruns, maybe a Kendall George with a huge tool because they're confident that their development is going to be able to handle it.
Yeah, every year, Shooter, I do those draft reviews and I write it and I say it because I believe it. But I think it kind of gets overlooked often. But I'll say it again: is success in the draft by a club. Like, okay, this club is really good at scouting. Well, they're really good at scouting because they're also really good at developing, right? I mean, it goes hand in hand. It's you can't make chicken salad out of chicken scraps, right? So you got to be getting some good talent in there for player development to work on. But once they do get those good players, right, they got to figure them out. They got to get the best tools and the best skills and the best performance out of those guys. So they go together. And if you don't have them together, what DJ was talking about, if they're not synergistic, that's a really big word for me, but not for you guys. But It goes hand in hand, man, because I'm not an expert player development guy, but I have coached. I coached college for a long time. Sometimes when your player development department starts doing things with pitchers, like dropping down a 5'10" right-hander, I know it's kind of like they want to give the kid the last chance because he's got great makeup, he's got great this, and they just want to keep him around. But some of the other stuff that they just do, like you hear about, makes no sense. So not to point fingers, but again, we've probably also sent in some players that are kind of looking at like, well, who is that guy? Like, why would you even send that guy to us, kind of thing? But when you get them on the same page, that's when you really see the results on both ends. But I think sometimes scouting gets the blame more than player development just because it's the initial procurement.
You and DJ are on the same plane. You're throwing an alley-oop to DJ right there with that.
Yeah.
Well, you just have to be comfortable. I think, Seif, it's not. This isn't player development. We're getting off course here a little bit, and we don't want to.
We are.
But it is a consideration. I mean, you've asked for different considerations, Shooter, in the draft room. Is it money? Is it talent? Is it ceiling? Well, there is a player development part of this. And when an organization is not comfortable drafting high school pitchers because their organization hasn't been able to develop high school pitchers, the scouting director knows he's on the hook for it. So he's going to eliminate. I'm not saying this is the right thing to do, but this is absolutely a consideration. If I'm a scouting director and I'm sitting there knowing that we're not good at this group of players, then how can I confidently select it? Especially if I think we're good at this group of players. When you are the Dodgers, when you are potentially the Orioles, and you're an organization that's good at a number of different things, that's when you become really, really dangerous. And if you layer on the money that the Dodgers have, then it becomes a really dangerous situation where they can be extremely, extremely productive at both ends of the spectrum.
And
so,
I think
but
this
this is a real consideration by directors.
This all ties back to our draft board. This is why I like having the big board. It kind of holds player development accountable, right? If we're just guessing where's this guy going to be drafted, it just goes off and happens. If you have, hey, our system got 3 top 10 guys and we didn't produce anything out of this, we might have to reevaluate some of this player development. We need to do something with this because the industry was telling us, and prep baseball was saying these were the dudes. They should just be able to go up and do it. So hopefully that works out. I think just draft wise from a distance, save college picks early. Seif. I think that's the way to go early on because those college guys are going to be better than the high school talent of this year, even though there's still a ton of high school talent. There's strong pitching depth from the prep side, more so in that round 2 to 3. Supplemental, I think you can get a lot of talent there. So expect some of those guys to push down as it has in the past. Quality bats early, quantity pitching later. That's kind of the forecast of right now with regards to the talent coming out of these prep and college classes. You guys have anything else from draft board side, mock draft, pools? I mean, we can go on for a long time about this.
I do, but I don't. We could go on a long, long time, but no, it's been good. It's been great.
Well, this will not be the last talk we'll have about the draft. It's still 2+ months away from. Geez, that July date is so late. And I'm sure all the scouting departments are saying, yeah, this is killing us. We're trying to do crossover. We will have so much more, including draft shows, some interviews coming up about the draft. We'll have some live reactions during the draft. Who had a great day 1? What are they getting ready to do in the supplemental round? What are they doing on day 2? What's going into those night calls? I know DJ, hey, between day 1 and day 2, we will be diving in very deep into what were you doing. I can only imagine you did not sleep for 3 or 4 days.
Day 2 might be the most difficult. Some scouting directors probably absolutely despise day 2. I enjoyed it, but talk about stressful. Day 2 is wild, especially early on in day 2.
Well, there you have it. Get ready for that. This was the draft board episode of The War Room, powered by Draft HQ and Prep Baseball. For Svihlik, Shooter, Seif, the 3 S's on here. We'll see you next time.